You know how sometimes a headline just pops up, but often the real story, the deeper stuff, is kind of hidden underneath.
Hmm.
Today, we're really going deep into the recent news about former President Joe Biden's prostate cancer diagnosis.
Yeah, and to really get a good picture, we've gathered quite a few different sources. We're talking Times of India,
Mm-hmm.
Politico,
Mm-hmm.
Fox News, People.com, BBC, Newsweek,
Right.
even places like the Uptown Standard and the Cancer Letter,
Right.
plus some takes from Onco Daily and YouTube transcript. So
Yeah.
it gives you a pretty wide view.
Absolutely. And our goal here isn't just, repeating the headlines. You can get that anywhere.
Sure.
We want to unpack all the layers around this. Yes, the immediate facts, obviously, but also the political reactions, how some past comments about cancer have suddenly resurfaced.
Right, that too.
And crucially, the whole background of Biden's own history with cancer and his work on cancer research. Okay, so let's start with the diagnosis itself. What are the core details we actually know?
Okay, so from what's been reported, it's described as an aggressive type of prostate cancer. Specifically, it carries a Gleason score of 9.
9, okay. And what does
Yeah.
that mean, practically?
Well, Gleason 9 puts it in grade group 5. And basically, the higher the score, the more abnormal the cancer cells look, and the more likely they are to grow and spread, quickly. So grade group 5 signals that higher level of aggressiveness.
Got it.
And there's also mention that it has metastasized, spread to the bone, and it's noted as being hormone-sensitive.
Hormone-sensitive. Why is that significant?
That's important because it suggests the cancer's growth is likely fueled by hormones. So that opens the door to specific hormone therapies as a potential treatment path.
And how did they actually find it? Was it routine?
The information suggests, that a prostate nodule was discovered after he reported having increasing urinary symptoms during a standard physical exam. After they found the nodule, more tests led to the actual diagnosis.
Oh, way.
And we know now that he and his family are looking at treatment options with his doctors.
It's pretty remarkable, isn't it, that despite how divided things usually are politically, the first reactions seem to be, well, a lot of bipartisan sympathy.
That really stood out, yeah. The sources definitely highlight this big outpouring of well wishes, support, coming from, all sides.
Like who specifically?
Well, we saw messages from Donald and Melania Trump, Barack and Michelle Obama, the UK Prime Minister, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, even people like Marco Rubio, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Gavin Newsom, lots of names.
Wow.
It really is a rare moment, that kind of unity around a personal health issue. It kind of underlines that shared human element,
Yeah.
that vulnerability that can sometimes just cut through the political noise, at least for a moment.
Mm-hmm. But as often happens, the story then took a bit of a turn because not everyone just sent well wishes. There was this 2022 video that resurfaced where Biden actually said, "I have cancer." And that's really added fuel to some, let's say, right-leaning theories about a cover-up. What was that all about?
Right, so that clip, it was from a press conference back in 2022. He was talking about, I think, the environmental effects of oil refineries near where he grew up.
Okay.
And he said, that's why I and so damn many other people I grew up with have cancer. Now, the White House back then immediately clarified. They said he was referring to past treatments for skin cancer.
Skin cancer, right. I remember that. Basal cell carcinoma.
Exactly. Which he'd had removed most recently in February 2023. They were very clear at the time it wasn't some new active cancer diagnosis he was revealing.
But now, with this new prostate cancer diagnosis, that old clip is being seen in totally different light by some.
Absolutely. It's led to some serious accusations. Donald Trump Jr., for instance, he went on social media and basically asked how Dr. Jill Biden, and he mistakenly called her a medical doctor, she has a doctorate in education.
Right, poor distinction.
How she could have missed, quote, stage 5 metastatic cancer, implying it must have been known and hidden.
So basically suggesting a cover-up.
Yeah. And other voices online picked up on that. Some argue that, advanced prostate cancer usually takes years to develop, so how could it possibly have been missed with all the medical checks a president gets? The implication being deliberate concealment, maybe even going back before he left office.
Did any medical experts weigh in on this, on the likelihood or the timeline?
Yes. Newsweek actually talked to a couple of experts. Physician scientist Stephen Quay sort of suggested that prostate cancer is often caught earlier, and metastasis might imply it was there longer, raising, questions.
Okay, so leaning towards the it might have been there a while idea?
Kind of.
Yeah.
But then Jonathan Waxman, who's an oncology professor, he offered a different perspective. He said, look, While it usually develops slowly, rapid development is possible.
Ah, okay.
And he also made the point that Biden would have definitely been tested regularly while in office, and he added that the prognosis, even now, should be good with survival averaging over 6 years.
So, conflicting expert takes, which isn't unusual.
Not at all. And we should probably also mention Laura Loomer, the conservative activist. She's claimed in the past that Biden had some kind of terminal illness. So this fits into some pre-existing narratives for certain groups.
This whole situation, though, it really throws into sharp relief just how much cancer has impacted Biden's life personally, doesn't it? It's not just this diagnosis out of the blue.
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, the death of his son, Beau, from brain cancer back in 2015, Beau was only 46. That was just a devastating event for him.
You can only imagine.
And it clearly profoundly shaped his views and became a real driving force for him in public life afterwards. It really explains his focus on cancer research.
And that led directly to the Cancer Moonshot Initiative, right?
Precisely. When he was vice president under Obama, he really spearheaded that whole cancer moonshot. He often said the fight against cancer was personal for him.
Yeah.
And the big goal was ambitious.
Yeah.
Double the rate of progress in cancer research. It was actually a bipartisan effort. Led to a bill authorizing, I think, $1.8 billion over 7 years, specifically for cancer research.
That's a significant amount of money.
It is, though. You know, experts always point out that sustained long-term funding and collaboration are really the key to making those huge leaps. It's an ongoing challenge.
It feels like, for some people at least, this new diagnosis is being seen through that lens of Biden's whole life story, his history of dealing with, well, significant hardship.
That's definitely part of his public narrative, isn't it? You know, beyond losing Beau, there was the unbelievable tragedy early in his career, losing his first wife and daughter.
Right.
His own health scares with aneurysms years ago, even the failed presidential runs before he finally made it. There's that anecdote he often tells about his father.
The get back up one.
Yeah, exactly. Get back up every time you're knocked down.
Yeah.
That idea of resilience, it's been pretty central to how he presents himself.
So the thinking is maybe this latest challenge could ironically remind people of those qualities, you know, the dedication, decency, family focus.
It's possible, yeah. In a way, facing this kind of personal crisis could perhaps soften some of the recent criticisms or just highlight that aspect of his legacy, regardless of politics.
Now, here's where the story gets even more complex, because Biden's own diagnosis is happening right alongside another related and really critical issue, funding for pediatric cancer research.
Yes.
It seems there have been some recent pretty concerning cuts, and given his personal history, well, it makes the whole topic feel particularly relevant, maybe even sensitive right now.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated and, frankly, quite troubling development. There was this bipartisan stopgap funding bill that Biden signed recently.
Okay.
And while one piece of pediatric cancer legislation, the Gabriella Miller Kids First Research Act 2.0, did eventually pass on its own, several other really crucial provisions for kids' cancer research got dropped from that stopgap bill.
Dropped? What kind of provisions are we talking about? What did they aim to do?
Well, there were a few key ones. The Accelerating Kids to Research Act. That was focused on making it easier for kids whose cancer has come back, relapsed, to get access to combinations of experimental treatments. A potential lifeline, really.
That sounds vital.
Then there was the Creating Hope Reauthorization Act. That was designed to give incentives to smaller drug companies to actually develop treatments specifically for childhood cancers. Right. Because, it's often not a big moneymaker for big pharma.
Right, the market size issue.
Exactly. And finally, the Give Kids a Chance Act. That aimed to help lower-income families navigate the red tape if they needed to travel out of state to get specialized cancer care for their child, making sure geography and income aren't barriers to the best treatment.
So really important stuff got left out. Is there agreement on why or who's responsible?
Oh, definitely not. It's turned into a bit of a blame game, as you might expect. Some Democrats are really pointing the finger at Elon Musk. They argue his post criticizing the overall spending bill as wasteful put pressure on Republicans to make cuts, and these pediatric provisions were casualties. They've even called him the Grinch who stole cancer research.
Wow, strong words. What's the Republican counter-argument?
They push back, saying Democrats controlled the Senate earlier and could have passed these measures as standalone bills then, but didn't prioritize it. They frame it as a failure of Democratic strategy.
And wasn't there criticism from then President-elect Trump about the bill's size, too?
Yes, that's mentioned as another factor contributing to the pressure to trim things down. It just shows how tangled these funding decisions get in the broader political fights.
So what are the real-world consequences, potentially, of these specific funding reductions for kids' cancer research?
Well, the concerns are pretty significant. Less funding could absolutely slow down progress on new treatments. Fewer breakthroughs. It could mean researchers lose jobs. Labs might scale back. Specifically, without those incentives from the Creating Hope Act, there might be even less drug development for kids. Families could still face huge barriers getting to specialized care out of state. And, crucially, kids with relapsed cancers might lose access to those experimental combination therapies.
That's heartbreaking, especially when you consider how little funding pediatric cancer gets overall compared to adult cancers.
Exactly. It's already a small slice of the pie, so any cuts are felt deeply.
Is there any effort to fix this, to restore the funding?
Yes, absolutely. Pediatric cancer advocates, various organizations, they are fighting hard. They're pushing Congress, trying to get private investment too. There's definitely talk about reintroducing those omitted acts as separate bills, hoping the past bipartisan support holds up.
It's worth remembering, wasn't President Trump also involved in this area during his term?
Yes. Back in 2019, his administration proposed something called the Childhood Cancer Data Initiative, or CCDI. The idea was, I think, $500 million over 10 years, mainly focused on improving data sharing among researchers.
How was that received?
It was mixed. Some welcomed the extra money, others felt it wasn't nearly enough, especially compared to the Cancer Moonshot's scale and scope. The focus was narrower, more on data infrastructure.
And the Gabriella Miller Act, the one that did pass recently, that has quite a story behind it too, doesn't it?
It really does. Gabriella Miller was this incredible young girl, an advocate herself, who sadly died from brain cancer when she was just 10.
Oh, wow.
Her plea for "We need action," her foundation, Smashing Walnuts, she really inspired a lot of people. The act is named in her honor, aiming to boost research for pediatric diseases.
Just incredible bravery. The human cost of these funding debates must be immense for the families right in the middle of it.
You see that reflected in the reaction from Nancy Goodman. She's from the group Kids v. Cancer. She described the cuts as devastating, painting a picture of, a family in one state potentially being blocked from getting life-saving care for their child just across the border at a top hospital because of these funding issues.
It really grounds the policy debate, doesn't it? And just remind us, why is focusing on childhood cancer research so critical in the first place?
Well, despite being relatively rare, cancer is still the leading cause of death by disease for children after infancy in the U.S. That's a stark fact.
Yeah.
And we've actually seen a worrying increase in the rates of childhood leukemia. But on the flip side, past research funding has led to major improvements in survival rates for many childhood cancers. It shows that investment works, which makes cutting it back even more concerning.
Okay, so finally, let's just briefly touch on the wider political context here. Biden's diagnosis didn't happen in a vacuum, did it?
No, definitely not. The timing is interesting. It comes just as there's been renewed scrutiny on his mental and physical condition after leaving office. Apparently, there's a new book coming out soon that touches on efforts to manage perceptions of his fitness.
Right.
And some commentators like David Axelrod had suggested this health news might actually, mute some of those discussions, at least for a while.
Interesting political effect.
Plus, you've got the ongoing fights in D.C. over the Republican tax and spend plans, general worries about government spending, and then overlay global events like Ukraine, the Moody's credit downgrade.
It's a very crowded and complex stage for this personal news to land on.
So just to wrap it all up, we've got this aggressive cancer diagnosis for the former president, triggering this surprising wave of bipartisan support, but also sparking these cover-up claims based on old comments, all playing out against his very personal history with cancer and his advocacy work.
Right.
And at the same time, these really worrying cuts to pediatric cancer funding, which themselves are caught up in the current political battles. That captures the main threads, I think.
Yeah. And it really leaves us with this final thought for you listening. Thinking about Biden's whole story, that theme of resilience, how do you think this new, very personal challenge might end up shaping his legacy? And how might it influence the ongoing debates about his health, but also about the future of cancer research itself? And maybe more broadly, what does that flash of bipartisan sympathy tell us, if anything, about shared human experiences cutting through the political noise? And maybe most importantly, what's our collective responsibility to make sure that vulnerable groups like kids fighting cancer don't get lost in the shuffle of all these political complexities?
Lots to think about there.
Definitely something to ponder.